When I started this work in the early 2000s and the late 1990s, I was keen to put Canada on the map in terms of the place of psychedelics. But what I've been doing for the last few years is to look beyond the North American settings to unpack some of the familiar stories and find unfamiliar stories about access to psychedelic ways of thinking, and that goes well beyond the concept of psychedelics, which was coined in 1957, but to think about sacred plants, to think about alternative healing, to think about indigenous ways of understanding trauma, health, and distress, and to really look beyond these borders in a big way, to draw in different voices, to really embrace the kind of diverse ways that we have encountered psychedelic thinking.
Okay. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome. Come and grab a seat. Make yourself comfortable. Arrive to the present moment. Feel the energy of the people around you. And if you're on Zoom, look around and see the faces of people around you. So I just want to say a quick hello before I introduce our fabulous facilitator for today. Welcome to the Cafe Scientifique on psychedelics and health equity. If you haven't heard of Cafe Scientifique, it is a program run by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. The idea behind these events are that researchers who work in a particular area have a chance to talk about their research and share their findings with members of the public. So this is a chance for you to listen to some experts in the field on this topic. And I'm pleased to say we have the top researchers in the field here to share their work with you today. So take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions and participate in shaping the future of psychedelics in Canada. So I do want to acknowledge the Canadian Institutes of Health Research for providing funding for this event. And I'd like to acknowledge MAPS Canada also, who's been a partner in this from the beginning, as well as the National Collaborating Centre for Determinants of Health, and Hollyhock Retreat Center, who's also been a sponsor of this event. So thank you so much to all of our partners. And I want to say a special hello to all of the folks who are online. I think we have about 100 people last time I checked who'd registered online. So I can't see you right now, but I feel you. So thank you for being here. And a big thanks to Nandini and Mandy, who are hosting from the National Collaborating Centre of Determinants of Health. There'll be a point in this agenda where we sort of disconnect from you and we'll allow you to have conversations online. And then we'll have our little party here and we'll reconvene at the end. And that's all I have to say for now. So with that, I would like to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Kim Haxton, who is going to facilitate our session today. So please welcome Kim.
Hello, everybody. And hello, everybody online. Even though I can't see you, I know you're out there. It's kind of a weird thing that we have these two different things happening at once. But of course, it is part of the paradox, right? And I want to acknowledge that we're on the beautiful territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh communities, and for the ancestors that have been here before us and the people, the ancestors that are here now, you know, doing really good work on holding down, you know, this urban area as we are here as uninvited guests. I want to also acknowledge that we have people calling in from all over, many different places. I have a friend, hope you're out there, Margarita, she's in Mexico. So there's really, it's a really amazing opportunity for all the beautiful humans. And today, our work, you have to forgive me as I look at notes. I hate this. I'm here, I'm talking to you, then I'm like, hang on a second. So I apologize. I apologize that we're in this kind of it's one of our barriers that we have in holding all of this. But I want to make sure that, you know, we're all here. It's like a thank you for giving your Sunday afternoon to us, you know, and all of the experts and ideas that exist in this room and online. There's a lot of people here that come from many different sectors. and have many different experiences. And one of the things in this work is about how do we go from the siloing into collaborative, and in a way that we are hearing each other. And that's the thing, hearing each other. And so that we're not alone. And we're doing this whole idea is around health and equity. We know that health, the measurements of health in the world, aren't great. We know that mental health and spiritual health is not great. We have a lot of people who are sick, and we have an opportunity with these different medicines to do a lot of healing. And one of the things too, we know that equity, right, is a thing that is a challenge in a capitalist white supremacist sort of ideologies and systems that have been in existence. And so when we're looking at policies, when we're looking at history, when we're looking at, how things affect equity-seeking groups, there's a challenge because there's a big, it's almost like a big blinder. Ooh, look at that. I will also want to acknowledge that, yes, and there's another thing, that there is being recorded. So just so you know that if you're online, if you don't want to have your picture, you can turn off your screen and you can change your name if you want. And for everyone here, this part is being recorded as we're in here, and I actually can't even read any of this anyways, because apparently when you get in your 50s, you need glasses, and I'm in denial. It's true. I'm going to use my I know what I have that I can do. There, that makes it much easier. There we go. Now I can see everything. I just want to make sure, like she said, we welcome your questions, because that's the thing, is that part of this work, we have some really amazing speakers here today that, I've been following, hopefully you've been following or will start following. And the work around equity and health is a really big topic, even though it's a big topic. I think we're kind of tired of going around and around it, but it really is like, how can we hear to make that step different, in each of our sectors, right? And understanding that there are many of us all together. So today it's really pretty simple. We have a panel that are I'm going to get everybody to come up in a second, and we've got amazing speakers online. There's question and answer, or you can ask questions on Slido. Is that right now? Is that, hello? I'm looking back there for the Slido question and answers, or is that when we get into the question period? Yeah. And we're going to get into question period at some point, and going to ask you to participate. We have Post-it notes for the people in real time, and we have we're going to break into some discussion groups. There's going to be a quick report back, and I'm saying this, and I'll say it again. Then it's like, when we ask you to report back, we don't want to hear everything that your group said, okay, just so you know. Maybe 2 or 3 things. And then if the group before says the same thing, we don't want to hear the same thing. We want to hear something if you have something else. Just because sometimes we can get into these talks and these discussions as a facilitator that I'm just like, oh, and I'll say that right now, and I'm going to say it again because I know we have some people who haven't heard me say that. And that's okay. I'm trying to think what else we have here. And then, also we have a really incredible person that I think is like incredibly creative and amazing. And we have Michelle here. Michelle, can you give everybody a wave? That's Michelle over there. And Michelle is our graphic recorder. And so Michelle's going to give a feedback with what she creates at the end, that we will get to see our discussions displayed in that way, which I think is really, really beautiful. And so I'm going to introduce, I guess, Michelle, do you want me to give your actual bio? Are you comfortable with that? Yes or no? I'll do it. Okay, I'm going to big you up. This is important. We got to lift each other up, right? This is one of those moments. Oh, so Michelle's a graphic facilitator and recorder from I'm Potawatomi, so it's a problem, with some of the names. Wet'suwet'en, but the one you have here, Kesek. Cassia, thank you. From Cassia Consulting. She holds a master's of public policy from Simon Fraser University and is a self-taught artist. The focus of her work is to lift Indigenous people up and to provide an Indigenous voice and perspective as she strives to work with people from an anti-racist lens. And I've had the good opportunity to work with Michelle before, and she's fabulous. So I look forward to what you create. No pressure. All right. And I'm going to call everybody up one at a time. And are we going to come up, sit up here now, or just for the discussion? Just have one person at a time. Yeah, are you comfortable with sitting up here and staring at everybody? ¿Por qué no? Why not? Okay. So I'd like to introduce Erika. Yes. Thanks, Erika. This is Erika Dyck. Am I supposed to call you Dr. Erika Dyck? Is a professor and Canada Research Chair in the history of health and social justice at the University of Saskatchewan. She's the author and editor of several books and articles on the history of psychedelics, including, I'm not going to read all your papers. Just, you can find it online, and Erika is amazing, and I'm really sad that we have such a short time for you to present. I saw you a couple of years ago speak, and I was like, this is mind-blowing and cool. So she's very cool. So please, this is Erika Dyck. Yeah. Our next guest is a powerhouse, and Monnica, I'm going to get you to come up. Dr. Monnica Williams is an African-American clinical psychologist whose research positions include associate professor in the School of Psychology at University of Ottawa. Ooh. Congratulations. At University of Ottawa, Canada Research Chair in Mental Health Disparities and Clinical Director of Behavioral Wellness Clinic in Tolland, Connecticut. She's an authority on anxiety disorders, racial trauma, and the effects of culture and race on mental illnesses. And she's a leader of a book called Eliminating Race-Based Health Disparities, Promoting Equity and Cultural Responsive Care Across Settings. Dr. Williams is also the forefront of efforts to include people of color, marginalized communities, and clinical trials studying the therapeutic effects of psychedelic medicines. And online, Amy, can you wave, please? Are you there? Is Amy waving? Okay, cool. Amy is a psychedelic researcher and community organizer, currently working on her PhD. Hi, and there you are. At the University of Ottawa in Canada. Her research explores the role that psychedelic integration plays in individual and communal healing, and her passions include trauma-informed care, community building, diversity and inclusion in the psychedelic space, ethics and harm reduction, and building pathways for safe, accessible, and well-supported experience with psychedelic substances and non-ordinary states of consciousness. What are you talking about there, Amy? Beautiful. And Amy is here and working on her co-mentor, co-conspirator in the beautiful work that you're doing. And last, I have Otis. This is Otis Jasper, who is an incredible human being. Otis is Stolo from Swahili. So did I say that right? Swahili, thank you. Swahili and Cheyenne nations, married into and currently living, actually that is not true, is now living back on his own territory in a really beautiful house, and is the founder of Sacred Circle and the director of business development and partner relations with All Nations, an indigenous cannabis company, and well-respected cultural leader with his family and community. Otis' vision is the preservation of our cultural healing practices for future generations. Otis served 10 years as elected leader and chief for his home community and has earned a Master's of Business Administration at Simon Fraser and is currently doing, what is it when you're doing your PhD now? Right. Yeah. is like a really smart guy. I can say that. And so this is a wonderful panel that we have to share their ideas and the work that they're doing. And I'm kind of excited, I guess, Erika, you're starting, is that right? Yeah, I want you to be here.
Thank you so much. I guess I don't need two microphones. I'm super excited to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? There's like an echo up here, so that's cool. And the slides will go on, because I think we only have 10 minutes, right? So I'm going to talk really fast. No, I'm super excited to be here. The last time I was in Vancouver, I ruptured my Achilles. So this time I hope to leave this place walking. So I've been working on the history of psychedelics for almost 25 years now, which makes me feel very old, but also I feel sort of excited to be in this space as I've been watching this conversation change quite dramatically over the last few years. And yet I think there's still some work to be done. I don't think that we've reached the place of finding a way to integrate psychedelics in equitable ways. And I'll just keep talking until my slides show up and remind me what I was gonna say. There we go. Now the clock starts, right? So what I wanted to share with you in this brief moment today, and then hopefully we'll get into over the course of the conversations, is, from my perspective as a historian, there seem to be some really exciting tensions. And what I wanted to just, do very quickly here is these kind of snapshots with some images that I've been collecting over the past few years. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you have a Getty image of, what I'm using to try to help us represent or think about, synthetic psychedelic plants, if you will, mushrooms in a test tube or a beaker in this case, and the idea that we could scale up psychedelics in a way that relies on laboratory findings in synthetic products. But on the other hand, on the other side of the screen, and these may not necessarily be in tension, they may be in harmony, is an image from the San Francisco Oracle in 1967 of a Huicholi man who, I'll let you decide what expression he has on his face, if he is deep in concentration, if he is somewhat forlorn, but he is sort of set up here in a rainbow-esque image, and if you had the full image, you'll see many different kinds of psychedelic plants lying around him, including sort of at the ground at his feet. And I think there's a healthy tension here, and sometimes I worry that it becomes an unhealthy tension between what we draw from culture and where we look for biomedical sciences to help to solve the problems of trying to find access and equity. And then I would move forward if I could. May I move forward? Could somebody move my slide forward for me? Oh no. I believe the next slide was supposed to say something about, well, I'll just talk about it and hopefully the slide will correspond with what I think I'm saying. So when I started this work in the early 2000s and the late 1990s, I was keen to put Canada on the map in terms of the place of psychedelics. But what I've been doing for the last few years is to look beyond the North American settings to unpack some of the familiar stories and find unfamiliar stories about access to psychedelic ways of thinking, and that goes well beyond the concept of psychedelics, which was coined in 1957, but to think about sacred plants, to think about alternative healing, to think about indigenous ways of understanding trauma, health, and distress, and to really look beyond these borders in a big way, to draw in different voices, to really embrace the kind of diverse ways that we have encountered psychedelic thinking. And then I believe you would see a map of my attempts to catalog this by scouring the internet. And what it would readily show you, oh, thanks. I was like, I'm gonna have to remember my slides, if that's the trick. All right, so this slide, I believe, one of the things I tried to do in the last little while is create an anthology on a global history of psychedelics. Zoe Dubus has a great chapter in it. She's here, you can wave. Dr. Zoe Dubus has a chapter about psychedelics in France. But some of the images here are hopefully just little symbols, little morsels of some of what you can expect there, and what we hope triggers a conversation about looking for these kinds of psychedelic encounters, and again, psychedelic anachronistically, in different parts of the world. Some of which are above ground, that is in clinical trials, for example, and some are hovering at ground level, others are deeply beneath ground, ones that don't use their own names or that rely on underground networks of information. Sometimes these are things like women trying to cultivate healing patterns that are not considered to be legal or ethical according to the authorities of the day. Male Catholics, for example, who don't like abortion or using plant medicines. I still can't move my slide if someone can move it forward again. Then I think there are maps. All right, if it gets to the map side, what we tried to do is look around at what was available in the published, digitally available literature. And what you get is a snapshot of really interesting movement of different kinds of psychedelics, both the synthetics as well as the plant-based psychedelics that move around the world according to published literature. But what we also found that there were sizable gaps in places on the globe that didn't have these kinds of movement or claims about psychedelic movement, despite the kinds of stories, oral histories, and oral testimonies that combat that kind of evidence that you can find readily online. And I think this is something that is not unique to psychedelics, but is certainly an opportunity in studying psychedelics to think about what we count as evidence, what counts, who counts as an expert, and how do we move beyond the sort of published, clinical, possibly, or at least above ground, things that go into national archives, for example. How do we move beyond those stories to get at what's really at stake when we're thinking about moving the needle on psychedelic thinking? A couple of the ways that I wanted to just quickly as examples show some of the work that I'm doing with a whole bunch of other people is to try, for one, let's think about the mothers of psychedelic movements, challenging some of the narratives about the great discoveries, the great men who have moved forward, some of our ideas about psychedelic thinking, and not to entirely dismiss those, but to really think about what it means if we were going to turn this around slightly and suggest that we look at this story or these stories through the lens of women. Here are some examples. Happy to talk about them at the break or at the question period, but what I hope you'll see here is there's a diversity of ways that women have shepherded ideas about psychedelics, nurtured people taking psychedelics, or nurtured ideas about them, and nurtured plants throughout this time. And there are some, I think that the image in the middle is one of my favorites from Rita Huni-Queen, who lives in Brazil, who sees Mother Earth as a mothered shepherd of the movement as well. And the next slide, please, if that's possible. All right, I'm going to skip the maps because I think they're coming sometime, but I don't remember when. Yes. One of the other projects that we tried to work on is, again, sort of looking at the consequences of moving psychedelics out of the clinic in different parts of the world. And, there are interesting and surprising, perhaps, things that happen when you look outside of the United States and Canada. So being a countercultural radical revolutionary during a dictatorship has certain consequences if you're a Brazilian youth living in the 1960s. If you are a Holocaust survivor living in the Netherlands seeking access to LSD for trauma, there's a different kind of language, and not just a Dutch language, but a different language of trauma that persists. And we can begin to see that in some of the paintings, like the one I have here on the screen called What Happened to Our Girls. There are a number of different stories that help us to think about the ways that cultural practices have informed, but also absorbed different psychedelic ideas and changed the way we might think about the consequences of, again, access, but also the consequences associated with prohibition and criminalization. And if we can roll on. Apologies. Another quick point I wanted to make was in the context of psychedelics. I'm trying to see if I can boil 25 years of thinking into 3 sentences here. All right, so there's these guys testing drugs, and they think that the best way to test drugs is to test the drugs and not think about anything other than the drugs, like objectively. Sorry. That's one rambly sentence. And then there's some other people who were like, hey, environment matters, and we should probably think about that. And then squish that together. And the rise of set and setting, I think, is, I'll try to be a little more articulate now, comes out of people who didn't know what they were doing, who were looking for different ways of trying to understand what this experience is, how to give language to it, how to appreciate it. And one of the really, a couple of cool things that I think happen in the way that people are trying to make sense of set and setting or trying to articulate what that means is they start listening to voices they didn't expect to, like their wives who showed up to help them at work and brought records into the space and talked about the sonic atmosphere and talked about sound and the acoustics of an experience that needed to be calibrated, that needed to be studied and thought about in a very particular way, not a standardized way, but a particular way. And if we go to the next image, the other really important influence here is the role of spirituality, the role of ritual and ceremony. The researchers I first started looking at in the 1990s for me, participated in a Native American church ceremony, several Native American church ceremonies, I should say, beginning in 1956. And they felt that this was such a powerful way to appreciate not just that kind of pharmacological way of thinking about measuring and perhaps identifying a risk profile of a drug, but to think about how to set intentions, how to be deferential to the people in the group you are with, but also to the experience itself. How to begin to integrate those ideas while you reinvest in kinship ties, while you think about coming together, coming into that kind of integration space. Those kinds of experiences were brought into the clinical space in a way that didn't necessarily last in the context of biomedical research. And the next slide, which I believe is my last. So, with a short amount of time, I want to conclude by saying these are just a few different examples that I've come across in my own research and that I've really sort of helped to nourish my own curiosity in thinking about the power that psychedelics have, not just as substances, but as ideas, as subjects and concepts that we can invest in as we think about the consequences of sustainability. I think we need to really deepen our appreciation for the diverse ways that psychedelics have taken root around the globe, but also how they affect our communities right here locally and across our various places where we've come from, and to really sort of breathe into that or lean into that diversity as we think about better ways to sustainably integrate psychedelics that avoid some of the backlashes that we might otherwise experience through prohibition or through harm that's done to communities who are not interested in necessarily sharing psychedelics or necessarily having psychedelics as something to cure something they maybe don't even have. Thank you. That 10 minutes? Yeah.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Now, if you want to support and become part of the psychedelic movement, feel free to donate to MAPS Canada at the link in the description below. Thank you for helping our mission to support equitable access to legal and regulated psychedelic medicines for all Canadians.
All right. Thank you. We'll see if I have any better luck with the slide system here. But I really enjoyed your talk. I especially liked you showing all of the women who've been involved, because I think at least once at every psychedelic conference I go to, someone shows a timeline of all of the important people in the history of psychedelics. Of course, that started when like a man discovered a psychedelic, and then that sort of becomes, I don't know, what our understanding of the history of psychedelics, and people think that there were like no women or people of color involved. So I made a new timeline, by the way, that's only women and people of color, and I have no issue leaving the men out, but whatever. We should just do that next time. All right. So yeah, so it's great to be here, and I just want to start off by saying that I'm at the University of Ottawa. Here's some of the members on my team there. We have a great bunch. I mean, this is just a few of them, and so many students that have come really just because they're interested in psychedelics, and then others who came for other reasons because they're interested in the diversity and equity work that we do, and then became interested in psychedelics too. And so, and so they really are the ones kind of behind the scenes, helping make everything happen. And so, I want to just take a minute to acknowledge my team at U Ottawa, because they're all fantastic people. All right. So yeah, and also in addition to my team at the University of Ottawa, I have collaborators that I have gotten to know over the years, from early work that I started doing with MAPS to to work all over the country in the US and Canada and Europe and South America, and just sort of great people everywhere. And I want to also take a minute and thank them for kind of being on this journey with me. And there's just a few of them there. So one of my main research interests is racism. That's what I study. And the way racism impacts our mental health and our society. And I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Is that? Yeah. And the mental health impact of racism. And so one of the things that I usually want to start with is just defining racism, because I think all of us feel like we know what it is, but often it's much larger than we imagine. So it's not just that white nationalist group that's, fighting to maintain their Confederate statues. It's really baked into everything. And I am still hearing an echo. Hold on, it might be coming from this computer. There we go, I think. Okay. So again, we have many types of racism, and most of the racism that we're dealing with on a daily basis is really a more covert kind of racism, which means it is in the form of implicit bias. It comes out as microaggressions or subtle acts. Certainly there are major acts of discrimination that are happening all the time, but there's also these more subtle acts that can be equally harmful just because of the frequency of which they happen. And then additionally, we have racism that's sort of baked into all of our laws, our policies, and our procedures that operate to advantage white people at the expense of people of color. And these policies and procedures and laws were made this way by design. It's not an accident that they're that way. And they can perpetuate racism without anybody actually necessarily doing a racist act. And so this is what we mean when we say racism is systemic, in that it's kind of woven into everything, and it operates as a system to advantage some people at the expense of others. Oops, how do I go back? So in terms of psychedelic science, when I first became involved in doing this work, it was with MAPS, and they had reached out to me and said, hey, we're doing these research studies and we would really like to increase the diversity of our research studies. And so I started working with them to first figure out what the problem was and then how it could be addressed. And I remember very vividly showing up for a MAPS meeting with a bunch of the leaders and PIs from the different sites that the studies were being run. And the room was like almost entirely white people. And I thought, I think I have discovered the problem. We need to diversify our research teams and our leadership, and also make a concerted effort to make sure people of color are included as research participants, because as we know, when we don't have diversity in the research participants, the findings of our research are not generalizable to everyone. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want effective treatments that are good for everyone. And so our research team, we did a kind of a deep dive into the literature. We looked at all of the randomized controlled trials of psychedelics that had happened globally, and to see what the representation was. And the findings were that, the vast majority of participants in the vast majority of studies where they even bothered to report demographic information were white. And there were very few studies that had any meaningful numbers of people of color. There were 1 or 2 studies that were specifically focused on communities of color, but for the most part, the people of color weren't included. We did a follow-up study also looking at ketamine trials that had been done for major depressive disorder. And again, we found a widespread exclusion. And so everywhere you look in this space, there's exclusion. And so one of the things I've been doing is really calling out this important problem, bringing light into the issue, and encouraging everyone to think about how we can make these spaces more inclusive, how we can have more people of color as researchers, and how we can recognize the great work that's actually already being done by so many people of color that continues to be overlooked. Another concern I've had is, in addition to how psychedelics may be helpful, how might they be harming people of color? And here's one example of weaponization of psychedelics. So for those of you who may not be aware of this, sometimes law enforcement uses ketamine to subdue suspects that they believe are suffering from what is called excited delirium. And then they may call paramedics or somebody, some quasi-medical person to come and administer ketamine to the person that basically they want to control. And this is not safe. There have been many people who have been harmed or killed through being subdued by ketamine. And here's one example of Elijah McClain, who was actually not doing anything wrong, kind of minding his own business when he was approached by law enforcement, and actually, like, footage that they looked at later saw that he wasn't resisting police, but for some reason they decided that he was having excited delirium, and he was given double the dose of what he should have had of ketamine, and he died. And he's not the only one. So. And usually in these situations, really nothing happens to the perpetrators, who made that call. And I should point out that there really is no diagnosis called excited delirium. And even if there was, like, law enforcement officers are not the people to make that call. So as a result of this and some other deaths of Black men who weren't doing anything wrong when they were given ketamine. This happened in Colorado. They don't do this again in Colorado, but they do in many other states. And so one concern is always that, okay, so we've got these great, potential new-ish technologies for helping people. And my question is always, and how are we going to end up using them to harm people of color? Because that's always what happens. And so one question that I think it's worth putting out there is, can psychedelics bring us together? Because I hear this a lot from people in these psychedelic spaces, like psychedelics are advanced as sometimes the answer to some of our problems around inequities and conflicts around race, ethnicity, and culture. Psychedelics can be the answer for that. And I think that I actually do have hope that this can be part of that answer, but in and of themselves, I would say no, because you have to have intention. You have to have intention and want to grow and change and learn. You will have to want to understand your own biases and how you can be a better citizen of the world by treating everyone as equals. And so until people have that willingness, then I would say psychedelics won't necessarily be the answer for bringing us together. But I think if people are willing to courageously look inward and start to do some excavations into those dark corners that keep them, I would say, separated from other members of the human race, then I think they can be an avenue for this. And so now I want to talk a little bit about what I've been doing in my lab to respond to this challenge around promoting equity in psychedelic science and practice. So one of the things that our lab really wanted to tackle, and we started doing this when we were involved with the MDMA trials that MAPS has been spearheading, is looking at culturally informed psychedelic assisted therapies. And so what we did when we started working with MAPS was basically look at all of the procedures of the study, from informed consent and recruitment to treatment and follow-up, and say, hey, how might this not be serving people of color, and what do we need to think about and do differently? And so we discovered many things that needed to be examined, that could be adjusted. Some things that were problems, but we couldn't actually fix them because certain decisions had already been made. And I just want to underscore the importance of getting someone with experience in culturally informed research methodology in your study on the front end, and not bring them in at the end, because then sometimes it's hard to make some of these changes. And generally, we were able to make a lot of progress, and that also included doing things like, for example, helping the independent raters understand racial trauma and know how to identify that when they're assessing for PTSD, because some of those raters end up being the gatekeepers of entry into a study. And if, for example, they're looking for PTSD, but they don't know that racial trauma can be PTSD, then those participants might not be included, for example. Other things include, for example, the informed consent. If there's language in the informed consent that might be off-putting to certain groups, that might pose a barrier to participation. So there were many different places throughout the research study where changes were recommended in order to improve the experience and participation of people of color. We wrote a paper about it that appeared in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies that I encourage anybody who's a researcher to take to heart, because I often have people asking me, how can we make our studies more inclusive? And I'm like, I already wrote that paper, so you would know. So just go read it. All right, and then if you have questions, you can ask after that. Another thing that we've been very interested in doing is psychedelic assisted therapy specifically for racial trauma in people of color. And this is one area we were really planning on zeroing in on during the expanded access phase of the MAPS trials, but for many different reasons, they decided to go a different direction with how that was going to work. So we didn't have a chance to do that, but this is still an important part of our research agenda. And we did publish a case study on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD related to experiences of racial discrimination. And we're continuing to do work in this area. Another area where we're very interested in exploring how psychedelics can be used for racial trauma is in groups that are using psychedelic plant medicines, for example, retreats and ceremonies, where people may have the opportunity to heal in a group setting. And summer, a year before last, 2022, I organized 3 workshops in Ecuador for therapists and other helpers. And then we also did one for Black women. And we're planning also to do some more workshops in Jamaica. And one of the things that we are going to be doing is seeing if having these groups, particularly in areas, maybe, for example, Jamaica, where you have mostly Black people there, so even the environment contributes to the setting, would help contribute to relieving symptoms of racial trauma. And so that's something we're sort of actively trying to raise funds for. And we have some colleagues at the University of Washington who are also interested in partnering with us on this. And so that's coming up. And also there's a big interest in addressing trauma in veterans. And so some research that I did partnership with some clinicians at the VA is we had in the States is we had put together a group training protocol for racial trauma, not a psychedelic protocol, just like a cognitive behavioral based protocol. And that's now being actually implemented at 20 different VAs right now. But also we're interested in getting the healing of psychedelics to this group as well. And right now there are many veterans who are pushing, they're pushing in the States, and we're seeing some things happen. And they also have a voice here in Canada. And I actually wrote an article for the Journal of Military, Veteran and Family Health called It's Time for Better Tools, because, as a trauma researcher myself, I do think it is critically important that those who've been serving our country have access to the best treatments that we have to offer them. And when the tools that we have don't work, we need to be able to offer them something else. So, and then finally, we've been developing some training programs at the University of Ottawa, and we have right now 2 micro programs, one in psychedelics and spirituality, and one in psychedelic science. And each program is 3 graduate courses that give you that little credential in that area. And also we are expanding this. We're developing a certificate program, and we have a master's program in psychedelics and consciousness studies that is scheduled to launch this fall. And so that's very exciting. So for those of you who might be interested, check us out online, because it's an online program. So very cool. And let's see. And that's all I have for today. So thank you very much. And if you're interested in supporting our work, there's the link to our lab, and you can learn more. And here's my contact information. So, thank you.
Amy? Are you there, Amy? Perfect.
Hello. I'll share my screen if that's okay. Can you hear me? So hi, folks. It's a pleasure to be here today, and a pleasure to be hearing from the other speakers. This is a great conversation. By way of introducing my contribution to the discussion, just to start out with saying, with the caveat that I choose throughout my presentation to use the reclaimed word queer to inclusively refer to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, two-spirit, and other LGBTQIA+ community members. So I wanted to start off very quickly just with a story of queerness and psychedelics that is kind of my own. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a white, queer, fat, able-bodied abuse survivor and colonizer living on the unceded lands of the Algonquin, Mohawk, and Anishinaabe people. I benefit from enormous privilege and am on a perpetual journey to better understand and dismantle the systems of oppression that I participate in and benefit from. I'm a psychedelic user, practitioner, researcher, and community organizer. And before coming back to school to do my PhD, I worked as a social justice lawyer for almost 20 years. And I lived overseas for much of that time, where both my queerness and my psychedelic practice were mostly hidden, mostly because many of the countries where I lived and worked criminalized one or both of those parts of me. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story in the hopes of shedding some light on why I care about the intersection of psychedelics, ethics, community, queerness, and healing. My story is one of queerness and psychedelics in that way. And like everyone here, that story is also, our stories are a big part of why we choose to work in and care about the psychedelic space. Research, too, is an important form of storytelling. And when we don't pay attention to whose stories are getting told, how we're telling the stories, and who the storytellers are, we risk failing to reflect on and serve the full human experience in all of its diverse, beautiful, and varied glory, as speakers have already talked about today. And to be clear, as others have mentioned, when we say research, I don't just mean clinical trials and studies undertaken in an academic context. As we all know, psychedelic studies have a long tradition of both formal and informal investigation, analysis, and experimentation, and should be encouraged within the community more broadly. And so in whatever form it takes, storytelling reflects our world, but it also creates it. So when we tell stories by doing research, we are deciding what is important to ask questions about. We shine a light on specific subjects, people, and issues that we deem worthy of inquiry. And these topics get explored, discussed, witnessed, understood, and reflected upon together. Those of us who care about the way the psychedelic field is unfolding need to ensure that the research being done truly reflects the complexity and richness of being human, which is why we're here today. So that's why this conversation is so important to the evolving psychedelic space in Canada. So just wanted to thank the organizers for bringing us all together. And so, what is the story of the interaction of queerness and psychedelics? In general, in Western society, there have been strides, and at least queerness is no longer a diagnosable pathology in the DSM. But we still have a long ways to go. The queer community has a long history of persecution, stigmatization, and abuse in society at large, as well as within the psychedelic research space. An overt example of this abuse is the use of psychedelics to attempt conversion therapy on queer people. The motivations and impacts of some of these abuses are documented and often horrific, but abusive actions are not always so overt. For instance, omitting an entire set of lived experiences from the field of study is also a form of discrimination and abuse. And for queer folks, it's one that continues to be replicated. And so why is the queer story an important one for the psychedelic community? First, I argue that there's an urgency to understanding and addressing queer pain and marginalization. The journey of self-discovery should be a joyful revelation, but despite growing numbers of people coming out in Western culture, being queer is still often met with violent opposition in most parts of the world, with dire consequences. Even in North America, most suicide attempts of queer individuals occur within the first 5 years of realizing one's sexual identity, irrespective of age. And in North America, we see queer teens attempt suicide at a rate more than twice that of their straight peers. We have just to look at our neighbors to the south and the clawback on trans rights to see how vehement the opposition can get and how quickly hard-fought equity gains can be reversed. And so, systemic discrimination has dire consequences for all marginalized groups, including queer folks. And at the same time, marginalized folks are often the ones who are most in need of healing, community, and support. However, as we know, these are also the groups that are being omitted from the psychedelic research space. Like other marginalized groups, such as women, racialized folks, and queer folks, the queer experience is often a painful one. And our work in the therapeutic psychedelic space needs to better understand the pain suffered by those outside of the majority. However, to date, queer folks have largely been left out of the psychedelic revival, as I will talk about more in a minute. Second, exploring one's identity and understanding of self is fundamental to the queer experience and to the psychedelic one. One of the greatest strengths of the queer culture and community is the variety of ways that people can identify and express their authentic selves. This grappling with openness to a wide range of self-understanding outside of the or of the binary also highlights the andness of the queer experience. Being queer is inherently a creative act. For ultimately, being queer is not just about pronouns or who a person has sex with. Being queer involves intentionally grappling with questions of how we love each other and love ourselves. As queer folks, we can't rely on what society has told us about love and identity. So we have to actively ask questions of ourselves, such as, who am I? Who, how, and why do I love myself and others? There are few questions more fundamental to the human experience than these, for queer folks and for anybody. Thirdly, while much research is being conducted on the therapeutic use of psychedelics in medicalized settings, there's a small growing consideration around the importance of community and peer supports in psychedelic experiencing, a priority that queer folks, amongst others, have known about for a long time. Communal experiences such as found family and safe spaces such as queer clubs, bars, and rave scenes that outwardly signal a permissiveness for queer joy and expression have long been shown to facilitate healing from queer stress and trauma, whether participants are in a chemically altered state or not. So while there is a need to better understand the therapeutic use of psychedelics to combat queer trauma, there is wisdom within the queer community and experience to help inform a more comprehensive understanding of the potential of a range of therapeutic sets and settings, which can benefit a wide variety of marginalized groups and lived experience. However, despite these and many other meaningful overlaps between queerness and psychedelics, there's very little research being conducted on the queer psychedelic experience. And even amongst the very small amount that has happened, there is a distinct lack of representation. Myself and colleagues reviewed over 20,000 academic publications across the sciences and humanities and found that non-stigmatizing research on the intersection of psychedelic use and queer lived experience is virtually non-existent. We found a total of 19 resources. And troublingly, the academic research we did find focuses almost exclusively on the cis gay male experience. Studies and research on queer, cis, and trans women's psychedelic experiences are virtually non-existent, and trans, bisexual, non-binary, and gender diverse identities are equally forgotten. This lack of queer identity diversity is replicated in the underdeveloped examination of the role that race, ability, and other intersectional factors play in understanding a wide variety of queer psychedelic experience. We have to do better. And so, what's needed in Canada to move the psychedelic space? First, we need more stories being told, more research around the queer experience. I'll give a nod here to researchers such as Alex Belser, Clancy Kavnar, Terrence Ching, and also to all of the non-academic resources and experts contributing to the psychedelic space. There are efforts being made to capture data on sexuality and gender in the clinical trials, but that data is often not disaggregated to make any meaningful commentary on the queer experience. And very little research has been done specifically to explore the unique ways in which queer individuals use, experience, and may benefit from psychedelics. We need more queer researchers, more research looking directly at the queer experience, and more research informed by the queer experience, such as identity formation and the importance of community. Secondly, we need to do some work to rewrite some of the existing stories, since, as I mentioned, there's a lot of stigmatizing research out there. We need to dismantle the stigmatizing narrative around the confluence or connection between drug use and the queer community. Thirdly, we need more diverse stories. New research must ensure that we're looking across the spectrum of sexual orientation, gender identity, but also ethnic and racial identities, ability, and economic privilege. Collectively, as a psychedelics community, we need to get better at seeking to understand the full range of lived experience. This includes quantitative and qualitative research by academics and community alike, exploring not just the therapeutic, but also the spiritual and recreational use of psychedelics for healing and transformation. Because as we all know, the lines between therapeutic, recreational, and spiritual are very muddied and thin in a beautiful way. So there's lots to share, but I wanted to give a taste of what I think is the enormous potential in building out our understanding of the interaction of queerness and psychedelics. To close, I wanted to leave a final thought. As we all know, our engagement with psychedelics is not merely a chemical interaction. It is a phenomenological one, a spiritual, transpersonal, and transformational one. As part of the complexity of engagement, experiences of love are often a big part of how psychedelics transform how we understand ourselves and the world around us. Whether it is cultivating a love of self, experiencing love in a relationship with others or with the natural world, or bathing in the cosmic love that is our inherent right as human beings. As a queer psychedelic researcher, practitioner, and community member, I believe we have a responsibility to bring more considerations of love into the discussion. And I believe that the queer experience is one of those perspectives that is well placed to contribute to our evolving understanding of this space. As Indigenous researcher John Burroughs has argued, love is a public good. And I would argue that queerness is also a public good in some intersecting ways. As we've discussed, in my experience, inherent in being queer is committing ourselves to understanding love, finding love and compassion for oneself, understanding love for and with others, experiencing love as acceptance, love as universal truth, love as an earthbound and embodied practice, love as a choice that we make every day, and love as both an act of creativity and an act of creation. As we continue to build our understanding of the therapeutic, spiritual, and recreational use of psychedelics for healing and transformation, along with other important and often marginalized voices represented on this panel, I believe the queer lens will be fundamental to further our understanding of psychedelics, healing, and the self. In short, the story of queerness and psychedelics is a story that is just beginning to be told, and there's still much more to be written. But in my opinion, it's definitely a story worth telling. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Israel, Quachwatelskwi, Tlitzentlats, Walla Ichiam, Entastalo. Good day, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and I'm very humbled to be able to share the stage here today and to be here in this moment with everyone. I think what I'll share, I have a video to share, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but it'll be a little more concise and to the point, I believe. I'm part of a group. We call ourselves Sacred Circle. We've been around for about 3 years now. And we're a group of individuals or Indigenous folks, Stalo for the most part. We're all Coast Salish. We're very fortunate to be grounded in our culture, in our ceremonies, in our spiritual ways. And the work that we've been doing has been guided by that, as well as guided by the work we've been doing with the plant medicines. And so I say we're fortunate to have those ceremonies and that connection to our spirituality through, as a result of our ancestors who, despite our gatherings and our ceremonies being outlawed in the colonial process with Canada, they went underground with it and they kept it alive. They faced jail time, they faced other consequences, but they were able to keep it alive for us. Our language isn't as strong, but our ceremonies and our spiritual ways were kept alive based on their sacrifices and their foresight. So this video here will capture a bit of our journey, the start of our journey. It'll share a bit of what is kind of driving us today, and I'll let the video speak for itself for now.
In this country, it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. It's not illegal to deny the genocide of Native Canadians, which continues to traumatize people, because now you're denying their experience.
There's a developing story out of British Columbia. The remains of more than 200 children have been located, buried on the site of a former residential school.
We all knew there's bodies buried. It was all whispered about.
You know, our suicide rates are 3 to 6 times the national average. 1 in 2 children in First Nation are born to poverty. Incarceration rates, depending on the province, could be 30 to 60% incarcerated. Yet we make up roughly 5% of Canada. So something's wrong.
They stripped me of everything. My language, my spirituality, my culture.
So when a child is being traumatized, it's like it's gonna last forever. The traumatized consciousness then takes that into adulthood and says there's no hope. People who are meant to respect themselves and one another start to loathe themselves. So then each generation then hurts the next one, and hurts the next one, and hurts the next one.
My people are having a real hard time all of them. And we really need something.
We don't want any more kids to grow up without their parents. And if we could use something to heal, I'm all for it. I'm all about saving lives.
Our old people used to say there was a time when the world isn't like it is right now.
There was a prophecy that said that the indigenous people would rise up again in knowing who we are.
Our culture has never been lost, but we have been lost in the colonialized system.
Now, I dreamt of my mom, and I was telling her, gee, Mom, we lost our language, don't know any of our medicines. What are we gonna do? And she said, don't worry, you'll dream.
Our people have been guided to these medicines, this plant that has this healing power. When they use it, they're able to be grounded again and to have that spiritual connection with this life on Mother Earth.
To go back to my spirituality and my teachings, my culture, that's when I started to find out who I really am.
You are an answer to the prayers of our ancestors. You have a responsibility. Help your people. You know what to do, you know what to say.
We stand on the shoulders of our elders. They're our strength. And we have to put the next generation on our shoulders.
The strength that you carried is the same strength that we learned our culture from elders like you.
I know who I am today. I'm a Kislewa woman.
But it's necessary that we as a culture turn to you for the healing, because the healing principles embedded in your traditions and your culture are so much wiser, so much more connected.
I believe there's a path here with the plant medicines that can help heal us.
By learning how to deal with it, I want to learn how to love myself.
We're teaching each other some things that we forgot.
As you heal, it'll help heal this whole toxic society that we live in.
Nothing wrong with making good people better, and that's why we're here.
All my life I've been waiting for the good to happen. I'm sure this is what I've been waiting for.
So, this kind of captures a bit of our journey, but what it really reminds me of is the hope, and that's been our experience in doing this work with the medicines. What we did as Sacred Circle is, we were grounded in who we were grounded in our ceremonies, and that's what we found when we reconnected with these medicines, is the familiarity that our experience with those medicines, along with our spiritual practices. There was a real familiarity for us when we got into those places. And so that's kind of been our guiding light, and it sent us on a path. And in many ways, what we're trying to do is find ways to create this space for these medicines to come to our communities, to come to ourselves, to our families and our communities and nations, which is in part why it's led me down this path to now doing my PhD, and at the very early stages of it through the University of Saskatchewan, where I initially looking at exploring entheogens as medicine. In that part, we have to destigmatize within our own communities what entheogens are, and work past and through the terminology and understanding of drugs. Entheogens as medicine, alongside culturally rooted therapy, can lead to community transformation. And so that's kind of the focus, what we have to work through is the legalities, the biases and the stigmas within our communities. Basically, where we're at and what we hope to do with this, the research and the work that we do, we have a number of streams. Research, we're doing our own work in our communities with our own people, with the medicines, in our own ways. And that's kind of what we're going to continue doing, but we're also trying to find the pathway to work alongside others, learn from others, to create more space and opportunity, so that these medicines have an opportunity to lead to transformation. And I think that's what I'm ultimately grateful for, is to be able to share spaces like this with folks, to connect and learn more and share when it makes sense to share. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, just because I think there's opportunity through the questions and conversation throughout the day. And just again, like to thank you for this opportunity. Lahai.
Thank you. That's a lot. That's kind of a lot to digest. And my mind is going with each speaker. I'm like, oh, hang on a second. And I'm sure that people here are also in that same place. So we're going to be opening up to sort of some questions and answers, I do believe. Again, I can't see what I'm supposed to be reading. All right, I just need a thumbs up and then I'll know I'm on the right. Perfect. And so we have online, there is Slido, I believe. Is that right? Is the technology we're using online for people to use it? And there's a QR code that's coming up. There's a QR code for people to hear to also do that, or are we going to do Post-its?
QR code here on the top one, and you can write your questions online.
I think, yeah, that's good. Perfect. Oh, look, a QR code. Yep. And so I'm going to start. Amy, I hope you're there. I just want to make sure that you're there. What are the benefits and risks involved with psychedelics for communities facing inequities? I'm asking anybody. I mean, yeah, I think big question. It is a big question.
Hello. Yeah, that's a big question, because I think there are massive benefits, which is why one of the reasons I'm here is because I want to make sure that, that as these are legalized and rolled out, that everybody has an opportunity to benefit from them. And I think there's also many risks as well. For one, we know that psychedelics can improve mental health, it can improve well-being, and there's a lot of other things that it can improve too that haven't even been studied yet. But psychedelics are very powerful. They're very powerful tools, and in just about every civilization that has used psychedelics, it's been done by very wise, experienced people overseeing the process. They haven't been used recreationally, and so so I see a potential problem with people receiving psychedelics as medicine from either people who are not qualified to do so, or on their own and not really knowing where to find resources to assist with integration. And I think that problem is going to become larger as psychedelics continue to be popularized. And it's definitely a concern that I have. And I think that this is even going to be potentially more true for people of color who may be looking for help for things like racial trauma and not really having competent support around the use of psychedelics for that purpose.
Yeah, or if you feel called to answer it, I think it.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know how to turn on that. Is that on? Yeah, it's gone on. Kim, I want to like have 3 hours for this and pick your brain about it, but I'm going to say something that might be a little bit pithy or maybe even controversial. And, I think in 2005, I like published my first paper on this, and I was like, you know what, we really should take a look at psychedelics. These could be really powerful and exciting and interesting. And now in 2024, I feel almost like we need to slow down on psychedelics. That there's a risk of taking the magic out of the mushrooms, in a sense, in trying to participate in psychedelics like they're part of a gold rush, and pushing them through in ways that don't forefront the equity issues. And those equity issues might be that psychedelics aren't for everybody, that maybe there are different priorities in some communities. Before we're ready to talk about integrating psychedelics in an equitable way, maybe we need to make sure everyone has a place to live or safe water to drink. And some of those priorities come from maybe thinking about psychedelics and asking whether those are the right tools. And I kind of fight with my former self, my exciting, naive, much younger self, who thought optimistically that these had real power to change the world, and I think they do. But I think we have to be really careful about whether we invest in them as ideas or we invest in them in different ways that could overwhelm some of those other issues that are going to persist and perhaps even be further divisions and further inequities.
Yeah.
So maybe a bit of my own thoughts around this is around the spiritual aspect of these medicines and the work that happens with them is profound. It's very real. And I had mentioned how we have our ceremonies in our structure, and we're fortunate because we're dealing with that opening of connectedness to our spirituality in another way. And I think these are, as I mentioned, they're very similar in that nature, which I think can run the risk of, we have a whole structure around how to support people and help them grow with themselves in this way. And that's in our communities, and that's what we're fortunate to have. And that's where I see and moments when, whether it's family or friends or people within the community who have gone on and had experiences with psychedelics, and not really had any sort of support with it. And I think that's a bit of a risky thing. And I think that's one of the things that we are trying to focus on, is not go too fast, but also to create more understanding and more discussions around these medicines, so that it's not just one-off in our community. We do see different companies and different folks knocking on our communities, trying to work with them, which is good. It's just trying to harness that energy so that we can work with them and build it in a way that's a holistic approach, focusing on the individual, the family, and the community. In the video we had, there was one of the ladies there was the grandmother who all of her children have done it, and now grandchildren have been working with them. And we've witnessed the powerfulness and the opportunity to create transformation on a family scale. And going from, we don't talk about that, to actually opening to talk about that amongst the generations. So I think that's just something that is a bit of a concern of mine, is that openness to spiritual, the opening, and you need to have some guidance and support in how to walk with that.
Thank you. It's fun. I want to touch base on that in a second, but Amy.
Thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, I feel like a disconnected head. Sorry I can't be there, folks, but just to chime in, with all of the caveats that my colleagues on the panel have said, and with great respect to all of them, I agree. And I'm curious about the reality that people are using psychedelics right now. So I run a psychedelic society here in the city of Ottawa. I've been doing so for 6+ years, and I run all of our integration circles. I've been doing that for a long time. And there are some benefits for communities, marginalized communities, coming into community with others. There's a power in witnessing each other and our journeys. As we'd like to say, you know, for folks who know Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Samwise are at the bottom of on the third book, they're at the bottom of the volcano about to put the ring in, and Frodo is exhausted and he says, I can't take one step further. And Samwise says, I can't do it for you, but I can carry you. And we are carried by each other in the witnessing, in the connecting, in hearing other people's stories and seeing how they heal, and learning how to work with our these medicines, and work with ourselves in that witnessing of each other. And so finding that support can be really powerful in community, and for folks who don't often have that access. And particularly, I'd say community does also provide a sort of democratization of access. As we know, the mental health system is broken. It's hard to get supports, and there are supports in community. That said, lots of risks, as other folks have talked about. You know, there's a need to create safe spaces. There's a need. Trauma-informed care is so important for so many people, particularly marginalized folks. And, you know, there are ongoing risks of abuse in community. There's a lot of accountabilities that we need to build into how we connect with each other, and holding each other accountable in ethical ways in community and in these peer-supported ways as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the things, you know, as I have to say this, I can't not. I'm the auntie that can't not say things. But we you know, we talk about spirituality and we talk about accountability, and those are two, you know, Indigenous communities have protocols that go back thousands of years. You know, so it's interesting when we're being told about policies, right? And this is a special time in history, I believe, with the movement of medicines, whether they're made in a lab or come from, you know, cultures, from different cultures, or the ignition of those relationships with those medicines. I think there's a really important thing that a couple of people have said to me, of my mentors have said over the past year. It's the time now around having the word spirituality in the conversation. I work with a lot of lawyers and stuff, and normally when I say spirituality, they shrink, you know, their tummies do that, and they get uncomfortable. And we talk about traditional ecological knowledge in academia, but it doesn't necessarily mean spiritual. When we say, when you go to the waterfall for your song, or you listen to the wind, and when you start saying those things that are concepts beyond, you know, it's problematic, because like, well, that doesn't fit within our research paradigm, and you can't really, that's not measurable by science. And I'm like, yeah, no guff. And right, and yet I think it's a piece in regards to how do we hold the accountability piece. You know, like, keep your pants on and keep your hands to yourself. Is, you know, that's kind of the big one that's come up in the past couple of years. And I'm sure there's other ones, you know, when we're looking at a capitalist model, you know, of running out time is money, and that sort of, you know, those sort of imaginings, where it's like, it is time to imagine something different. So, you know, it's one of those things where this conversation is such a big one, and I really want this to be a participatory, and I have some questions already that have come in, so I'm going to ask them if that's okay for you, and in no certain order. Can you speak more about those? Is it therapies? I'm sorry. How can therapies be made more accessible to people in communities with less financial resources? Because right now we know that you know, even in the retreats going to different places in the world, we know that who has financial accessibility for a lot of that stuff, it still is exclusionary. So maybe somebody could talk about the finances around it. And then I'm going to read the other question, because they kind of both fit really well together. Two of the questions that came from online. Are there opportunities for young BIPOC and queer people to participate in psychedelic research? Two questions in one. Anybody? Yeah, they're Monica questions. Monica, you get to solve all the problems.
Yeah, so can you repeat that first one? I can only handle one question at a time. So.
The one is about for accessibility for financial accessibility for.
Right. So, I mean, if we're looking at the, psychedelic assisted therapy, rather medicalized model, then yes, that's an expensive route to go, especially right now. I mean, I actually have 2 clinics where we do ketamine assisted therapy, and it's a big price tag because there's a lot of resources that weigh in. Everyone has to get an assessment, a psychological assessment. They have to get a psychiatric assessment, a medical evaluation. Preparation. Everybody has 2 therapists. It's a 4-hour session. So, there's a medication administration fee on top of the 2 therapists' time. So it adds up very quickly if we're looking at a treatment plan that may include 3 sessions, three drug sessions, because you're going to have preparation and the dosing and integration and then you're going to repeat that. So, so it's thousands and thousands of dollars, and it's absolutely out of the means of most people, much less low-income people. And so it's going to be really important that these therapies be covered by insurers, and so that the burden of the cost, can be more equitably shared. And I think that this is actually going to be covered by insurance in the States. Here in Canada, I'm a little more worried because mental health care isn't really covered well, and even people who have insurance are usually only like $1,000 a year that you get for mental health care. So that won't make a dent in the cost for that approach. So we definitely need to think about how this can be more accessible. And there are certain models, like maybe with group administration and whatnot, that can bring the price down. But at the end of the day, I think that the treatment a person gets shouldn't be based on like what they can afford. It should be based on what they need. So, so I don't really necessarily feel comfortable saying, oh, the low-income person can have the group treatment, because maybe that's not what's best for them. And also, I do think, to Amy's point, that there are a lot of opportunities for healing in communities, in ceremonial settings, in community, spiritual, psychedelic, gatherings where people can get the help and support that they need, without the same kind of costs, for example. And one example is in the Santo Daime Church in Montreal. You can get, ayahuasca there. I mean, it's not specifically for people with, say, severe mental health concerns, but it is one avenue where people can get, some healing and some, and use psychedelics for their well-being. But if you think about it, it really, I think, shouldn't be as expensive as it is, because, and I'm also concerned too, because there's a lot of, I've mentioned this before, because it's a new popular thing. There are a lot of people seeing something on the horizon and sniffing out money and trying to figure out how they can profiteer on this. And I don't think that this should be something people profiteer on. And we know that the pharmaceutical industry is looking for ways to make money off of it by creating drugs that they're going to charge, like a shitload of money for. And it shouldn't be expensive like that. I mean, mushrooms grow out of the ground, So I think that there's no reason that that some of these community avenues should be expensive, and they should also be equally accessible as the more medicalized approach.
Thank you. I'm just going to go to Amy first. Amy?
Just to piggyback on what Monica just said, but just, I think she hit the nail on the head. Is a solution to be found in trying to stuff psychedelics into a medical system that's broken, as we've been talking about, or, with a lot of restrictions and challenges that we're facing? Or is a solution to be found in rethinking what a psychedelic community of care looks like? When we think about how people make choices in a medical system, we go to doctors, psychiatrists, there's professionals who have got a lot of training, but also we go to acupuncturists and we go to nutritionists and we go to Reiki healers and we go to our spiritual leaders. So there's a lot of different ways in which we experience and take care of our health in society. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how we think about what a community of care for psychedelics looks like moving forwards. And I think, yeah, so the financial accessibility, I think, needs to be top of mind, but I think, as Monnica said too, thinking about it broadly rather than just how do we fit it into our existing systems.
I'm going to say something might be controversial and radical, but I think that we maybe don't want to look at the United States as a model, with all due respect to our American friends. I think insurance companies should get the hell out of this space. And I think we should maybe look outside our own borders, as we often as Canadians also look south. Why don't we look somewhere else where they have alternative medicine as part of the community care that's already baked into their infrastructure for public health systems? And I think there are models out there, and one of the things I saw in the video there was that this represents a kind of element of hope. And whether psychedelics, make you hopeful when you're on them, or whether thinking with them helps us to think outside of our boxes, our orthodox ways of thinking. I love the hope that might be reinvesting in communities and looking outside of our borders and outside of our normal ways of thinking, our regular ways of thinking, maybe listening to the wind for a little while, to challenge ourselves to think outside the box. I think that is a really hopeful opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to switch the next question because it's specifically for Otis. Are you ready? Would you be willing to talk a little bit about the types of transformation you have seen in your communities through the use of medicine?
There's so much that
there's so much.
Maybe what I'll share a little bit is, we've been doing this work, and part of the way it's spread to some folks, because we don't share it a lot, because we do it pretty quietly, but in some ways where the folks who have worked with us have found out about us is through witnessing other people and the change in them, and seeing that transformation in individuals, and kind of like, what have you been doing? So there's that profoundness to the observer, and that's been a bit of a way of moving people to be more in tune with themselves, and others can see it, and included for myself and many of us, our partners are the ones who weren't necessarily involved to begin with, but saw and experienced the difference in us, and then they came and joined us. And so it's been kind of that process of seeing the awakening in ourselves, and the openness and the connection, and just that personal transformation.
Beautiful, thank you. It's interesting. I've got some questions here that kind of all sort of run into each other, but it is about accessibility through identity as BIPOC people, and what that looks like. And then the other one as like a non-academic queer white settler using psychedelics, how can I find safer psychedelic mentorships and community? And I think this is where we're seeing the need for access to alternative, I just want to name it because we know we need those type of centers right now, because we know that a lot of the centers it is based on money, right? It is really who has access to go to different countries. And also, that's a complicated story in itself as well. And I love this question because it just goes to a little different, because we're going to get into some of those questions for the person who asked about the BIPOC and the person who asked as a settler, non-academic, queer person. We're going to get into that after, okay, around we're going to do a participation around the board of things that are still coming up for us, and then possible solutions or ideas. We want to hear your ideas, not to do mining, but like how do we share what needs to happen? I think it's really important. And I like this one because how can psychedelic research be promoted when psychedelics are still illegal and people have so much fear around it? Anyone?
No one else is jumping up today. One of the things I love about studying psychedelics is that there's not sort of one space where you can go to find out who are the experts or which voices to listen to. And I think that messiness actually makes it quite fertile and quite interesting, productive. And lately, as a historian, I really like hanging out with old people who tell me about the past. It's one of my hobbies. And what I'm finding in road tripping to, along the Pacific Northwest and meeting with a number of mostly wise women, I'm just going to call them generically, wise women who've told me about their experiences in this space, is that despite the embodied knowledge that they have accumulated over sometimes 60, 70 years, they have been left out of the conversations. And there's a tendency, I think, to say, we're doing it better this time. We're going to avoid the pitfalls of the past. We're not going to have a Timothy Leary. We're going to avoid those hippies, anyone with day glow, step aside, no buses allowed, So there are all these kinds of caricatured images that we try to avoid in getting it right this time, sanitizing it, making it look different. And I think there's a real risk in that. And this is a kind of roundabout way of saying, I really do think we have to sort of peel back those divisions about underground, academic versus non-academic, embodied knowledge versus curious, newcomer, and start to roll up our sleeves and think about ways that we can dismantle some of the silos that have divided us from being able to speak to one another across disciplines, or ways of knowing knowledge, ways of accessing knowledge. And I don't have a solution for that. That's my job as a humanities person, is to have no answers. I ask questions. That's what we bring to the table. So
I just want to identify something there, because I think it's really great that we could have a kumbaya moment together and that, but I think as Indigenous knowledge holders, it's a really important piece, because, I know that I've talked about it with some of our friends of there's some people who want knowledge and it's like, hell no. It's so clear that how they will use it isn't in kinship or relationship and building on lateral liberation. It's based on pocketing their own advancement, generally through, and I will say this, academics. And that is a thing that I have seen. And so I know that for other equity seeking groups who aren't even in the sort of conversation, and because I have a lot of questions here around that sort of stuff, that it is really important piece. I know that you were a lawyer, Amy. And so do you want to speak to that part about I think that question, about, why are we promoting psychedelics when it's still illegal?
Yeah, lawyer hat off. I was a human rights lawyer, not a criminal justice lawyer or whatnot, but, there are clinical trials there, in being able to do research on the phenomenological or sort of the experience people are having on psychedelics and the healing, monitoring the chemical nature of it, all these different things. There's that kind of research. And yeah, that's really tough to do because these substances are illegal. But, not to be a broken record, and I'm sure Erika knows all about this more than I do, stories aren't illegal. There's so much that we can be doing in the qualitative and quantitative space to understand how psychedelics and humans interact. And we can do that through our stories. And I'm really excited about that. It's not illegal to talk about having done psychedelics or planning to do psychedelics. That's how we run the psychedelic community here too. I can't, and we do not give information on how to procure illegal services or substances, but we can talk about our experiences till the cows come home. That's very legal and deeply powerful in terms of shifting the needle culturally, socioculturally, politically, and that is how we liberate spaces for the legality for use, I would argue.
Yeah, and I can also just jump in and share a little bit about why this research is actually quite difficult to do because of the legal issues. When I first came here to Canada from the States, it was my intent to do psychedelic research. And I thought, well, Canada, they've recently legalized cannabis, so maybe it will be easier there to do the work. And I can just tell you a little bit about my experience working with one attempt to do some psychedelic research around microdosing psilocybin for racial trauma. And we had a kind of an industry partner that was taking care of acquiring the microdoses, and also was assisting with the way that the doses would be delivered, such that it would be secure and so forth. And so, I had to get ethics approval from the university. I had to meet with Health Canada, get their approval. And basically I met with a whole team of folks from Health Canada, from all different aspects of Health Canada. And there were a lot of weird questions about my research, namely, well, why would we want to study racial trauma? And and then also, well, what's the research that's already been done on microdosing? Not much. Oh, why don't you go study that in mice first and then come back later and then we'll think about it. Mm-hmm. And then meanwhile, in terms of getting ethics approval, we completed a very, I thought, comprehensive protocol, submitted it to our research ethics board. They got it, they freaked out, they didn't know what to do with it. They punted it over to the Ottawa hospital. They looked it over, they said, oh my gosh, you're giving people psychedelics. Well, this definitely isn't ethical, and rejected our, our request for ethics approval. And I had to go back and say, no, did you read it? We're working with Health Canada. It's gonna all be above board. And then they said, oh, well, you're not affiliated with Ottawa Hospital, so we're not gonna review this. And so then I had to go back and get an affiliation with the Royal so that I could actually send this to an REB where they knew what they were doing. And that whole process took almost a year. So all this to say, it's very difficult just to even get the permissions that you need to do the work because of all of the misinformation and the stigma and the barriers and the red tape. And, unless you have, a very efficient and large machine with a lot of money, it's hard to even just get your foot in the door. And that's why there isn't more psychedelic research going on, because there's all these hurdles you have to clear. And that's just some of them.
Thank you. I think there was a question around that for psychedelic research for BIPOC people. Will there be more? And of course there is.
Yes, there's going to be more. Reach out to me, send me email.
Monica's at the helm of that.
Get you on the list.
I just also want to be mindful of time. I hate this time thing because I'd rather be in conversation. But I do have one more question, if anybody knows this one, which is there an organization in Vancouver that are currently providing accessible psychedelic treatments? And I don't know if there is, but maybe somebody knows that in their audience, as I'm looking at some of the people I know, but maybe everybody's all quiet. So talk to Helen. Yes. Awesome. And I would say, yes, I know that there's people out there who are making sure that there are offerings for people, but it's not enough yet. And so we're seeing that starting to, happen on the sidelines or in different ways. And I know that there were some other questions here, but I think it's like one of those things that we're in the process. I say we, I'm not we. This whole movement is in a process where it is a tsunami. I want to name that. And, my teachers and my mentors who have lineages that go back speak to this, and they say, it's way too fast. I'm like, what can you tell us? Some wisdom about this? What can I bring back? And they're look at me like, and they're like, it's got to slow down. And we know that there's a thing within our systems and our societies that slowing down isn't really a good thing. You know, we've had moments of that where we experience that silence and that stillness, and that's where the things come through, right? That's where allowing that, but we're in a system that's like a locomotive or a tsunami. And so it's really challenging in these times. And I think there's a place in which there is wisdom from a lot of different cultures, you know, who have wisdom practices, and it's not just indigenous to North America. I think people come from places where they have that stillness. And so I think it's really, as we're, you know, as we're reconfiguring and we're being in this place together, where it's like, what does that actually mean together? You know, and how do we do it in a place that is equitable? And, you know, we're coming into more of those places. Oh, wait, there's one more question. Should we do it or not? Maybe this is, okay, this is maybe, ooh. How does the protocol, I'm gonna ask this one question because I'm like that. And I think time is one of those things. We'll stretch it out, okay? How does the protocol of research prep dose integration compare to indigenous protocols? What is missing? What's different? That's a really big conversation. I don't think we can do that as our closing question, right?
I will just say a lot of what we know and what we do has been appropriated from indigenous wisdom, by the way.
Yeah. I'm ticking my little fingers. You know, that's my like, hell yeah, that's is true. And yet, you know, there's a conversation on how do we have an open. This week I listened to an astrologer who's like Harvard, Oxford trained. She's like this radical woman who lives in Malaysia, and I forget her name. And she said, keep out of other people's bullshit. And she said, and her other wisdom was like, evolution happens from within, you know, and I really held that for navigating the worlds we're navigating right now, is to be like, people are, you know, kids say the darndest thing, but people say the darndest things. And we know that, you know, and when, you know, one of my grandmothers says, Jano, your great great grandmother, you know, to hold the information, you are nobody, me, you know, but it's our ancestors that are with us when we can listen, you know. Did you want to add into that? You're thinking about that? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. I think there's it's really important. The conversations are really important. You know, how do we be together in not a transactional way, but in a relational way? You know, and across our lines, and knowing when, and really being able to listen. I think that's one of the toughest things in our time. We get in ping pong of our ideas, of creating ideas with each other, instead of really being able to just allow people to be seen, heard, and celebrated for where they are. For those who are therapists, you know how to do that, but still doesn't stop us, right? And that's, I think, a big practice in, you know, all the beautiful work and the research that's happening out there, you know, that is like, you know, Monnica, I can't imagine being, you know, a person of color, femme in the middle of academia and the fights that you've had to put up with, but, you know, like really, and the limitations, and there's limitations, and there's also really great, amazing things that are coming through research that we're seeing, that I'm like, oh, this is so cool to hear what's happening, you know, and that's really hopeful. But how do we blend and hold things in a way where there is that place of transformation, where there is that place of like unlocking? And I know that there are people in places of leadership who don't want to know, we don't want to talk about that they're doing medicines. And I think that's really important, that I know that there are people who are, shh, don't tell anybody, you know, but I am so like, yes, you know, because the shift we know has to happen with the systems that we're in.
I will say,
awesome.
Really briefly though, because my mind was going in so many different places. When we do our work, we do use the studies and the research that are out there to guide our dosing, and just as a precaution in a safe place. I think there's another dynamic to that, because we try to avoid the dose that will open them too much spiritually, And so that's something that we govern. The folks that we've worked with for a while, we will take them over that mountain from time to time, but it's kind of working them to that place where we have a understanding that they have a grasp of it, and we're prepared to support them through that.
Beautiful. Proper training. Are we having a break right now? What is happening? Do we agree that we were going to do that? I remember a meeting that we had.
Yeah, so this is a break right now, so everyone feel free to take a break. Take a watching break, get a snack, clean up yourself, and then we'll come back in about 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, and have discussion questions. But I encourage everyone to also check out the vending table. To the Canadian Psychedelic Summit, and they're also coloring books that you can purchase for $25, and proceeds also go towards the cause. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you back here in about 15, 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, it's going to get fun and interactive for you, okay?
Hi, everyone. So as you'll have heard, the in-person group is taking about a 15 to 20 minute break. And I know that everyone has been online for a while now. So I invite you. Sorry, I don't know why my mute button came on again. Yeah, so as you will have heard, the in-person event is just taking about a 15 to 20 minute break. And so I invite you all, given we've been online for a while now, if you'd like to take a break, go off and do your thing for 15 minutes or so. For those of you who would like to continue staying online, we do have a brief sort of interactive word cloud exercise, which is just really meant to, generate a bit of online discussion. So if there are people who are interested in taking part in that exercise, you can stay on. So maybe, given everyone has been online for a while now, maybe we can, for those who want to do that interactive exercise during the break, maybe come back in about 5 minutes, and then we can launch that interactive exercise, which is really about thinking through what kinds of values and principles would you want to see guide the use of psychedelics using a health equity approach. So happy break. And for those of you who want to take part in that online exercise, see you back online in about 5 minutes. Otherwise, the full event will reconvene in about 15 to 20 minutes. So thanks so much, everyone, and really look forward to connecting with you in a few minutes.
I'm David Bronner, Cosmic Engagement Officer at Dr. Bronner's, board member of MAPS. Subscribe to MAPS Canada. Bam!